the body is so interesting, and there's so much stuff that we've yet to learn. We now know that the mitochondria, these little tiny organelles, actually emit light themselves. I mean, we
Really?
emit light. We are actually emitting biophotons all the time. The emission is so weak we can't see it.
Welcome to the show, Sarah. Thanks for coming on today. Um, so I'm just going to jump straight into it and start from the basics because it's a new topic to me and I would just love to know some more about it. So, what is biohacking and how did you get into it?
Hey, Lisa, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here for sure. Um, but yeah, biohacking is really just about utilizing your environment to hack, which is, like kind of a computer terminology. And I think mainly that's because it originated over there in Silicon Valley, where they were used to that kind of language. Um, and I think now maybe the language is a little bit brutal to describe, something that's actually more about optimizing your body by
Mm-hmm.
using the environment, and whether that's something you're doing yourself internally with breathing or other kinds of body work, or whether it's maximizing other aspects of your environment like light and grounding, magnets, other electromagnetic fields. But really, it's optimizing health, is how I would kind of broadly describe it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it sounds the word when they say like the word biohacking, it sounds like, oh, I'm putting microchips in myself or something, but it's like the complete opposite. It's like non-invasive, right?
Well, I think there are some biohackers, who are doing that kind of extreme form.
Okay.
And they tend maybe to call that transhumanism, where
Yeah.
people are doing things like you say, putting chips under your skin or maybe putting something in your eye.
Okay.
But that's kind of, yeah, it is slightly different from the biohacking kind of field that I move in. Certainly,
Mm-hmm.
um, in the different countries, it can have, a more different vibe,
Mm-hmm.
because I know, in Europe, it's much more about a more natural style of biohacking. But then in some
Mm-hmm.
parts of the States, it's still more about the tech. And then, like you
Mm-hmm.
say, there are some people who are doing this very, very extreme modification. So I think
Mm-hmm.
everything comes under a biohacking umbrella. But most of, the big biohacking groups that you see are much more about using technology in the environment in a way that's more in line with your body rather
Mm-hmm.
than some of these extreme things. But I mean, it's still very interesting what you can do, even if you are doing some of the extreme. I think if you put in biohacking, you'll come up with some guys who are doing CRISPR, for example, trying to actually change gene expression.
Oh,
So
wow.
there are some people doing some very out there things, and it all comes under that umbrella. But yes, you're right. I'm much more into the kind of going with nature kind of style
Yeah.
of biohacking.
So what's your background? How did you kind of get into it?
So my background is pharmaceutical. I started out in pharmaceutical research
Mm-hmm.
and looking mainly at pharmaceutical for asthma. And I very soon began to understand, that there's much more to treating these conditions than just giving somebody a drug. And in fact, my research in the pharmaceutical company was more about how you can optimize how well a drug might work in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if you're taking an inhaler, it's going to work differently whether you're someone who's been outside a lot and so you're grounded than someone who's been inside and maybe has built up a charge in their body. So that
Mm-hmm.
really is what got me into thinking, okay, what we need to be doing is maximizing what's happening in the body rather than just going straight for the drug approach.
Mm-hmm.
So I retrained as a nutritional therapist. I did nutritional therapy for a while, and then I kind of went back to my research roots and started working for alternative medicine companies that were looking to really prove what they were doing, because I think that's the case for a lot of these therapies, is that they're unproven, and so people tend to dismiss them.
Yeah.
Um, so I started doing research into alternative therapies, and that led me over to the States, and that's where I got involved in the biohacking movement, which was
Okay.
kind of fairly new at the time.
Yeah. So, is it something that's been around for a long time and then there's just like a new kind of term that kind of categorizes it? Yeah.
It's Well, there's a chap over in California, Dave Asprey, and I don't know
Mm-hmm.
whether you've heard of him when you've kind of been doing your research, but he kind of calls himself the biohacker of biohacking, and he claims to have invented the term.
Okay.
And I don't know whether that's true or not, but certainly he was there at the beginning of that. And I would say probably, I don't know how long ago that was, probably about 8 years ago, something like that, maybe a little bit longer. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's relatively recent that that term's been used, but people have been using alternative medicines and kind of adapting their environment, for thousands of years. You can find evidence of people using electricity, just by stepping on fish that have electric properties, however,
Mm-hmm.
thousands of years ago. Or heliotherapy was something that was practiced by the Egyptians,
What's that?
heliotherapy, like using the healing light from the sun.
Oh, okay. So
So
is that, sorry, I was just going to say, is that kind of similar to then the red light therapy or?
it is for sure. So red light therapy uses not just red, but red and near infrared light,
Mm-hmm.
and it's targeting the healing properties of that light on the body. But really, what it's doing is, in a way, it's mimicking the healing effect of the sun, because the sun contains all frequencies of light. But
Mm-hmm.
the frequencies that you see predominantly in the morning and the evening, which is the red and the infrared, have specific actions on the body. And it's those actions that are being used for red light therapy. It's just taking those frequencies of light and applying it in a kind of more programmed, controllable way. But you're right, it's effectively just mimicking what the sun is doing, when
Okay.
you're seeing the sun at different times of day.
So are there any like biohacking things that we might be doing without realizing it in our day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you are making a decision to go to bed early, so that you're
Mm-hmm.
getting 8 hours sleep, that's a hack. You're kind of hacking your environment. If you decide to sleep in a dark room so that you're not getting exposed to light, that could be a hack. So I
Mm-hmm.
think, yeah, that it's not something fancy that, only certain people in California can do. No, biohacking, it's really just about maximizing your environment to make yourself healthier than you are, to kind of
Mm-hmm.
optimize where you're at. So things like
Okay.
diet, sleep, being outside, grounding, cold showers. These are things that people probably have done or tried and may not know they're biohacking,
Mm-hmm.
but that is what you're doing. Lots of things, even if you go on a fast, that's considered a biohack, because you're
Okay.
actually manipulating your environment in order to get a health outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Ha-
Yeah. Um, so are there like any new exciting kind of things in the field that are like doing more research into at the moment?
Well, I'm a bit of a light fanatic,
Mm-hmm.
so I mean, I'm always following the light research. So if you ask
Mm-hmm.
me about the most exciting things, I'm always
The
going
most
to say
exciting
light.
light thing then.
Well, there's lots of other things going on. Of course, people are developing all different kinds of nootropics, and,
Yeah.
and like nootropics, that's just a word for like a brain health supplement.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I go to an event, uh, recently, that tends to be one of the things that come up. How can you manipulate your brain chemistry? Um, so that's something that's very interesting. Like I say, I'm more interested in light because it's a natural process.
Yeah.
And so, from my point of view, the most exciting thing that's happening at the moment is researchers are beginning to understand how light affects the brain.
Okay.
And certainly for conditions like dementia or Parkinson's, anxiety, certain autistic Asperger's spectrum disorders, people are starting to look to see how can you specifically add light to the brain or sometimes the body to have an effect on those conditions, which, like I say, the most exciting thing for me is there isn't actually a current pharmaceutical or any other remedy to help those conditions. And
Mm-hmm.
yet with light therapy, people are beginning to see that they have relief from some of those symptoms, get a little bit of memory back, better cognition, better motor skills.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's incredibly exciting because we kind of live in an aging population, and of course, we all want to prevent, getting to that stage, but also just having a better brain generally. Because,
Yeah.
we also live in an environment where we're bombarded with so much information, having that ability to focus, to concentrate. If we can do that with light, instead of taking a drug or a pill or even a nootropic, that's great. And learning how you could specifically do that and maybe even pulse at a frequency that entrains the brain waves, that's kind of, to me, that's next level medicine. It's kind of medicine that not only helps your condition, but actually makes you healthier as you go along, as opposed to a drug, which, potentially, you're getting relief from one symptom at the cost of
Another.
something further down the line. Yeah.
Yeah. So the red light therapy you said uses a bit of red light and infrared light. How does that work? Like, how would you use it? How does it like go into your skin and affect you?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about red and near infrared light is it appears to be working at a fundamental level of the body. And one of the latest discoveries in biology, which is mainly not quite so mainstream, is called mitochondrial medicine. And that's where you are actually looking at the mitochondria as one of the main sources of health and potentially chronic illness. And for people who can't quite remember the mitochondria from like biology classes, the mitochondria are like very small organelles that are in the cell that are responsible for energy production mainly. Although they have a whole host of other, they're now discovering they have a whole host of other functions, including cell signaling. So light is received by these small organelles, and it actually light enters the respiratory chain, which is how the body makes energy. So
Okay.
what happens if you shine light into the cell, or onto the body, and it goes into the cell, it's taken up by the mitochondria, and the mitochondria then is able to make more of the energy molecule ATP, which gives the cell more energy, so you can have healing in that way because you have a lot more energy. It also releases another molecule called nitric oxide, so you have greater blood flow and more removal of toxins. So really what you're doing is helping the body to kind of heal itself in the most effective way rather than kind of targeting a specific illness. Um, and when you think about it, we've evolved under a sun. We've evolved with the sun, and so our bodies are covered in these light receptors. We're meant to work in relationship with that sun, and we're meant to get energy from the sun.
Yeah.
So that's probably why it's such an effective therapy, because our bodies innately recognize it.
So what's so special about the red and the infrared? Why not the rest of the light spectrums that we get from the sun?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the colors of the sun depend on their wavelength. So you have red and near infrared, for example, are long wavelengths. Um, they have a long wavelength of light, which means they can penetrate deeper into the body, which is one of the first things. The shorter the wavelength, the less able the light is able to penetrate. So, for example, right down the other end of the spectrum, if you remember your rainbow, you have blue at the other end, and that's a short wavelength of light. So that doesn't penetrate very deeply into the body. So the reason why red and near infrared light are so important to the body is because they can actually penetrate fairly deep inside the body and actually reach those different tissues and reach those mitochondria, which is the target tissue. Different wavelengths of light does have different effects. And the shorter the wavelength of light, the kind of more powerful it is. So blue light, for example, is used to kill bacteria on the skin, because the blue wavelength of light is much more powerful and it can actually disrupt bacterial membranes.
Wow.
So that would be used for acne. People now use that for acne because you have acne is generally caused by like little lesions that you have on the skin, and then bacteria gets in, and then you have these like marks form. Well, blue light can be used to actually destroy the bacteria on the skin, and that leads to better skin and clearer skin when you're thinking about those kinds of treatments. So each of the wavelengths of light has a different target site in the body. It's just that the red and the infrared ones go deeper, and they're the ones that are specifically absorbed by the mitochondria.
So would blue light, if it kind of breaks stuff up, would that be bad if you have too much of it?
Well, again, this is something else that's people are talking about a lot, because if you think about things like tablets and screens, we're not talking in
Yeah,
person, we're talking on this call today. And so I'm looking at you, but I'm also looking at a lot of blue light that's coming
yeah.
off of my laptop. I mean, and I've got my window and everything open, so I'm kind of mitigating against that a little bit, but certainly blue light toxicity is something that could potentially be detrimental to people, especially in sensitive areas like your eyes. And there is some research to suggest that, yeah, blue light can be damaging to the skin and to the eyes over a long period if you're exposed to a lot of it. So, yeah, there is such a thing as blue light toxicity. I mean, there are ways to mitigate it, like, not exposing yourself all day to computer
Yeah.
screens, not
And
shining
can
that light in your eyes.
can you get too much red light as well?
Well, everything always is in the dose,
Hmm.
and I think potentially you could, but using these devices, it's very difficult to overexpose yourself to red light, because none of these devices are really as strong as the sun. When you go out in the sun,
Yeah.
but there is something called a dose response curve in any kind of
Okay.
therapy, but particularly red light therapy, where a little bit is not going to do anything. And there is a point where you get increasing returns, but there is a point where you then start to get a detrimental effect if you use too much. And probably what's happening is, if you keep making the mitochondria work harder, you get a lot more energy up to a point, but there comes a point where you make too many reactive oxygen species, or you make too much waste for the cell to deal with because you've accelerated the metabolism, and then it does become detrimental. So yes, you can do too much. You need to pay careful attention to dose, just the same as you would anything else. A
Yeah.
little bit's good, a little bit, is good for you, but there is certainly too much of a good thing. um, so if you're looking at things like devices, most good manufacturers will tell you the dose. They
Yeah.
will say,
Okay.
okay, you need to use this device for 10 minutes twice a day at this particular output.
If you were doing red light therapy, is it more concentrated than if you were just standing outside getting light from the sun, or would it be less concentrated?
It again, it depends on what you're using, because
Yeah.
there are all different ways to deliver the light. There,
Yeah.
some light is delivered in LEDs and some in laser. Um, and with laser light, you very much are concentrating that beam of light. So you're kind of putting it down into like a pinprick size. And so, yeah, you are getting a much higher concentration of light in that particular spot on your body than you would from the sun, and with LEDs also. And you're also filtering out all of the other light. But the sun is, the sun is massively bright. And so, when you're comparing your exposure to the sun and your composure exposure to red light, it's more than just whether you're getting a higher dose. You also need to take into account, are you also exposing yourself to a lot of UV if you're getting it from the sun, or
Yeah.
what time of day are you standing outside, because that will make a difference with regards to the percentage of red light in the sky. So yes, you can concentrate it in higher areas using a device. And certainly with the brain devices, they try and use a smaller concentration of light in a specific area on the head, because then you're targeting and you know the dose that you're getting.
Yeah.
Whereas standing outside, obviously, you don't know the dose.
So does the season affect like the amount of light that you should be getting, or what's good for you, what your body needs? Have they done much research into that?
Yeah, they've done a lot of research into that, not so much for red light, but if you think about something like vitamin D production,
Yeah.
vitamin D production in the body depends on the amount of UV light that you're exposed to. So,
Okay.
for example, in England, we don't we don't really get any sun, between October and March or something like that. And because of that, you don't really make any vitamin D during those months. And so people monitor that because something like vitamin D is very closely related to your ability to deal with infections, for example. We've just come out of this crazy pandemic where people are very sensitive to, how susceptible are you to catching a virus?
Yeah.
Well, vitamin D levels are very important in looking at that. And it turns out that, your vitamin D status could be something that really determines whether or not, you catch certain viruses. So people are monitoring that all the time. Um, Also, if you think about SAD, I don't know if you've heard of SAD syndrome before.
I've heard
It,
of like sad diet.
SAD diet, but that sounds awful. Uh,
Standard American diet.
oh, I see. Well, this particular SAD stands for seasonal affective disorder.
Okay.
And this is a disorder that some people get in the winter months, especially in northern countries like, England and Scandinavia, in that people get depression in the winter months. And this is probably closely related to vitamin D, but also exposure to that red and near infrared light, because, at certain times of day, you're not getting the amount of light that you need. And then it's interesting to look at adaptations. Your skin pigmentation also depends on the amount of light that you get. And so, if you have northern countries, you need even more light if you have a lot of skin pigmentation in those areas. So certainly the amount of light that you get and that you can utilize very much depends on where you are on the planet and what season it is, for sure. And so probably red light is something that's even more useful for people who are living in a northern latitude
Yeah.
in the winter months. Yeah.
It's strange that our body wouldn't adapt better to having a lack of light if you're living in like these darker countries.
Well, I think the body has adapted a fair amount. I mean, we can store a lot of vitamin D in our body. So if you
Okay.
think about really we are pack animals who have evolved to live outside. It's only relatively recently that we kind of live in these artificially lit homes. Modern humans as we know them have probably been around for like 200,000 years. And up to now, we've lived outside. And so, we've adapted to that seasonality in that we live outside all summer. So we build up a store of vitamin D. And then in the winter, we can cope with, having a few months where we don't make that conversion because we've already made the storage. But modern humans don't do that. These humans that we are in the last 200 years where we've lived in artificially lit homes, we don't go outside all summer to build up that store. And so that all of that evolution that's kind of gone before us, that's built up that tolerance to light, we're kind of a little bit going against that because we're not living in a way that our
Yeah.
bodies have evolved to live.
Yeah, because it's happened, it's like within even just like the last 100 years, it's like
Yeah.
things have changed so much in terms of like technology and what type of light we're actually getting in our day-to-day life. Do you think now, especially now and in the future, that red light therapy and this sort of thing is going to be especially important since, more of us are working from home, we're on the computer, there's just more technology coming about all the time, and less people are going outside and doing stuff and getting natural light.
Yeah, I do. I really think it's something that we are going to have to look at very seriously because, like you say, it's becoming now where it's the norm for, for us to speak over Zoom. People have got used to it, but also the indoor lifestyle. And people are starting to look at it. I mean, I was talking to a chap the other day who was starting to do some research in hospitals, for example. How can we change hospitals so that the lighting has changed, so that we try and remove a lot of the Wi-Fi, so that we try and limit people's exposure to these non-native electromagnetic fields. And by that, I mean, ones that you wouldn't normally come across in nature. For example, light, to maximize healing in hospitals or to maximize our exposure. And I think people are starting to understand, a lot of modern phones and things will have a blue light filter. You can put it on night mode.
Yeah.
People have started to, people can wear blue blocking glasses, hospitals can make this, but it needs to go a little bit quicker, I think, because we're sort of heading a little bit towards a whole generation of people that have just had too much of this non-native light exposure and not enough natural light. And how can we make that transition easier and with a bit more grace
Mm-hmm.
so that we don't come up against a lot of these problems? So I think people are going to start to find solutions. It's just at the moment it's not really something that's mainstream or that many physicians think about, because we're still very much in a drug paradigm of,
Yeah.
this is how we cure illness, is that we have a drug that fits a symptom. I think it's going to take a little bit of a shift in people's understanding of biophysics and how the body actually relates to light for people to really make that shift.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly on a personal level, people who are trying to understand their bodies and understand their environments, there are things you can do to kind of mitigate against what's going on and still live in the modern world.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can't go back. It's difficult to
No.
go back. We're all
Yeah.
used to our comforts. We're all, the internet seems to be here to stay. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. More and more of these technologies are going to start coming out, and people are going to start recognizing, okay, we've sort of understood our chemistry. Now we need to understand the physics of the body as well.
Yeah. Do you think that's going to be quite hard? Because, I mean, pharmaceuticals, it's a massive industry, and there's so much money in it. Um, is there like pushback for this kind of more alternative side of medicine in the scientific community? Or would you say they're quite supportive of biohacking and red light therapy?
Well, I think money talks to a certain extent, and really, that dictates a lot of what happens. And I think if people are starting to see results, then big companies like pharmaceutical companies will start to come on board with some of these things. And
Mm-hmm.
certainly there is a case for using some of these more alternative therapies in conjunction with maybe a pharmaceutical approach to enhance it. So you can kind of maybe, you know, things start to open up from that point of view. But yes, I don't think it's something that's gonna have mass adoption straight away, because we the system is well and truly in place. We do have a pharmaceutical mainly system.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it takes for that generation of people who have that mindset, to kind of move on for their careers, for something else to come in.
Yeah.
Uh, but a lot of the university studies are still funded by pharmaceutical companies, so it is going to be a gradual process. But it's heartening for me to see, there are big companies, there are people doing the research, and they're doing them
Mm-hmm.
in conjunction with universities, um, and big medical device companies and potential pharmaceutical companies will be looking at that and seeing, okay, how can we also integrate that?
Yeah.
But you're right. I think it's going to take it. It will take a while, and for now, certainly, it's still a little bit fringe.
Yeah. Well, no, it sounds like a really exciting field. I mean, what were you saying about light helping like Alzheimer's and stuff?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's the research going in on that at the moment?
So there are several groups who are looking at um, how light actually affects the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, in Australia, they're looking at Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
And so there's a researcher there, Dr. Anne Liebert, and she's doing a lot of research using red and near infrared light. And she's mainly using laser, but it's of a certain wavelength, targeting the gut and the brain, and finding that you get a decrease in symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Now, the way that we think that's working is, like I say, we're targeting the mitochondria in the brain. So you're
Mm-hmm.
having this effect of um, increased energy in the brain, so the brain can potentially regenerate, which is, something that's obviously needed in Parkinson's, because you do start to lose tissue in Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
And also you aid sleep, and we all know that sleep is one of the main things that you need for these kind of degenerative diseases. And you have this like a flushing of the brain that occurs in sleep, that if you don't have that, you potentially have buildup of waste products,
Yeah.
along with implications that the gut is very much involved in these kinds of degeneration. And certainly things like a distorted microbiome are very strongly linked to um, Parkinson's and even Alzheimer's and some of the other depressions. if you can influence the gut bacteria with light, which it seems like you can do, and in fact, there's a whole new field coming up called photobiomics, where they're just looking at the interaction of bacteria with light.
Mm-hmm.
A combination of all these things, or perhaps it's just one of these things, the research really hasn't pinpointed it down, but whatever it is, they are finding that they can help certainly people with Parkinson's to get relief of some of the symptoms. So that's very exciting, because it's something that we haven't been able to do with drug therapies. Certainly the drug therapies coming out for Alzheimer's have proved to be a little bit disappointing in their effect, whereas
Yeah.
some of these studies, I have another friend who's doing a study with Alzheimer's, and he's using a very specific band of near infrared. He's using 1070 nanometers, and they're just starting a study with Baylor Scott and White in Texas, and they're showing that they're having an effect on how people relate, whether people can actually interact socially, can people understand how to draw a clock, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's very exciting. Paolo Casano, he's at Harvard University. He's doing some fabulous stuff now on bipolar, depression, and I believe he's now started to look at anxiety. And he recently put a really excellent YouTube out that was funded by the Down Syndrome Society, actually in the UK, where they actually showed using light they could help people with Down syndrome to increase their cognitive capacity. So all of
It's
these things,
really amazing.
it's really very, very fascinating. And like I say, at the moment, the actual direct mechanism of action, we still don't totally understand it. But certainly this mitochondrial effect, where you're allowing the cell to have more energy, seems to be one of the big things that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It could also be, the body is so interesting, and there's so much stuff that we've yet to learn. We now know that the mitochondria, these little tiny organelles, actually emit light themselves. I mean, we
Really?
emit light. We are actually emitting biophotons all the time. The emission is so weak we can't see it.
Yeah.
But maybe if we're triggering this kind of communication by, using light to give those little power packs, the mitochondria, the energy, maybe they're able to increase their photonic emission, and then you're getting greater communication in the brain. And that could then lead to better cognition and memory and all those great things that we want for our brains.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, we just need more
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, for sure. No, I didn't know we emit light. That's cool.
We emit light. Yeah, there's this really fabulous researcher that I was lucky enough to go and see in Germany many, many years ago. And he did those first experiments with biophotons. And he actually started off with plants, with cucumber seeds, and he put them in this pitch black room, and then had this piece of equipment called a photomultiplier, which basically just means light multiplier. And you could see these fabulous images, of light being emitted from the plant. And since then, people have used it on humans. You can see light coming from fingers and from hands, and from the eyes. So yeah, when people have that kind of woo woo, yes, we're beings of light,
Mm-hmm.
that isn't just some woo woo saying. We really do function very much in our relationship with light, and we also emit light. And I think
Mm-hmm.
actually maybe that is something that we're missing a little bit here in our communication now. I'm kind of seeing you on a screen, but
Yeah.
if we were actually in the same room, you would probably be detecting those biophotons that are
Yeah.
coming off me, and maybe responding to that in a way that's in addition to just the image that we're getting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Is that kind of related to like our aura then?
it's sort of, I think it's a little bit different, because when people measure auras, they're looking at like a discharge from the body.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
something that's a little bit separate, because it's measured with a different piece of machinery. But whether there is some crossover, when you say to someone that they've got a lovely aura, maybe you're
Mm.
picking up on information of their biophotons.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a little
Yeah.
bit of something in the language there.
Or like, sometimes you just know someone else is behind you, or like if you're like feeling their light, that'd be cool.
It could be some kind of extrasensory perception that we don't know.
Yeah.
And really, when you think about light, is really just, it's a wave that's on the electromagnetic spectrum. But
Mm-hmm.
the electromagnetic spectrum is vast. We kind of have put a limit on one end and on the other, but really, it could go as far as infinity. So we really don't know the waves that are coming off of us. And in terms of electromagnetics, we can measure an electromagnetic wave coming off of the human heart, for example, as much as 2 meters away. And that's the
Oh,
work of
wow.
HeartMath, where they've looked at the field of electromagnetic emission that comes off the human body. We already know we can measure it to a certain point. So that could be your kind of feeling of someone's behind you. Really
Hmm.
you can pick up on someone's electromagnetic field. And I
Wow.
think that's probably true. When someone walks in the room and you kind of that
Yeah.
you get an uneasy feeling or a good
Yeah.
feeling.
Or you're like, you could cut the tension with a
Yeah.
knife.
Yeah. Yeah, probably because it's that kind of static effect of everybody's
Yeah.
electromagnetic fields. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned the Alzheimer's thing. So having the light on the gut, but the gut's like a second brain, they say, isn't it? So um, have they if they focus it just on the gut and only the gut, do you know what sort of effects that has?
Yes. Well, the gut is called the second brain. And I
Hmm.
mean, it's because there's a lot of neural tissue actually in the gut. And a lot of neurotransmitters are made in the gut. And also a lot
Okay.
of other signaling molecules that are used in the brain are made in the gut. So this whole concept of the gut as a second brain, I think, is an extremely valid one. And so, yes, there have been studies, particularly rodent studies, where they've used like a mouse model of dementia and used a light to shine just on the gut to see if it has an effect. And it does seem to have an effect, certainly on a lot of these models of dementia.
Hmm.
And there are a number of reasons why that may be. One, it could just be a systemic effect that you're irradiating the blood, and the blood kind of carries this enhanced mitochondria back to the brain. Also, you make a lot of stem cells. You have abdominal fat, and that's where a lot of stem cells can be made. And light has been shown to help stem cell proliferation. And of course, once the body makes stem cells, it can then send it to wherever part of the body that needs repairing.
Hmm.
So that's another reason why it could be having the effect. I've already mentioned the bacteria in the gut. And then also, the gut is innervated by something called the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is a nerve that kind of transcends the whole of your body. It goes from your gut, right up the sides of your neck, and innervates.
Oh,
So potentially you could be stimulating the vagus nerve, which then has an effect on the brain, on breathing, on social interaction, on all of those other good things. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why targeting the gut could be very, very useful for brain health.
wow.
Yeah.
Um, and then stem cells, aren't they? They're used for like, are they good for like anti-aging, or when people are trying to like live longer or stay young for
Yeah.
longer? Isn't stem cells what they're like looking into or something?
Yes, they are, because stem cells are the body's way of making new cells. Because when you make new cells, your body makes a general cell, and then
Hmm.
it differentiates it into whatever cell that your body needs for healing. So have if you've busted your knee, your body will make stem cells, and then it will turn those into the cells that it needs to kind of reconstitute what's the damage that you've done.
Hmm.
And so, when people talk about stem cells, and I know, you can have stem cell therapy to try and rejuvenate your face, that's because, yeah, you can take those cells and you can inject them into like your face, or, into a part of your body, like your knee,
Hmm.
to give your body those cells it needs to kind of regenerate. So
Okay.
that stem cell therapy is very popular because it is actually giving the body the building blocks of what it needs to kind of make a tissue that's failing, or make a tissue that needs to be rebuilt. And there are various places where your body can make those stem cells. Like I say, the adipose tissue and long bones, you make it in the bone marrow of your long bones. So people can take it from there. I think it's a little bit controversial because the other place, obviously, where you can get stem cells is um, umbilical cords,
Yeah.
and also, you make them when you're making a sperm and an egg and you come together and you get a cell,
Yeah.
then you can get cells from there. So when people are doing stem cell therapy, it depends whether you're using your own stem cells or whether you're taking stem cells, for an example, from an umbilical cord, then use need them.
And does it matter if it comes from someone else? Like, would it? Does it? Is it like, if you get someone else's kidney, you could reject it? Is it the same with the stem cells?
Yeah, they do. You can do a procedure where you can kind of remove the markers, and so
Okay.
umbilical cord from someone else, you can make it so the body doesn't reject that. But it's always better to use something from your own body. And in my point of view, if you're not going to these extremes where you're kind of just injecting it for a beauty point of view, if you're trying to heal your own body, it's better to encourage the body to make its own supply of stem cells
Yeah.
rather than to inject them. Although, people do get good results from that, and it just depends on how many you can make, how fit you are yourself to be able to make your own stem cells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. There's so much to this. Is there any other like topics in here that I've missed? I'm sure there's like loads, but that you think would be interesting to cover.
From the light point of view, I think, we've kind of gone fairly quickly into like the extreme uses, people who use
Yeah.
it for dementia and people who are doing all this crazy stem cell therapy. But manipulating light, doesn't have to be via a device. You can manipulate your own light environment simply by like getting up at sunrise. Because if you get up at sunrise and you see the light, you're naturally getting those red and near infrared wavelengths of light. And that triggers a whole cascade of things that happens in your body because, like I say, we have evolved really to see that sunrise.
Yeah.
If we don't do that, there's a lot of reactions that don't happen in the body that then kind of have a detrimental effect if you kind of compound it, if you're doing it day after day.
Really? Like what?
Well, even like setting your for how your hormones work, you have certain hormones that are triggered at certain points in the day, and that trigger is really the light you receive at that point of the day.
Yeah. Wow.
So, for example, melatonin, you make melatonin and that helps you sleep. However, the trigger for your body to make that melatonin is seeing the light in the morning. That sets off a whole cascade of reactions that allows your body to produce enough of that hormone in the evening. And then that then allows you to sleep and have a really good sleep throughout the night, regenerate your body and your brain, ready for the next morning. If you don't see that early morning sunrise, you kind of miss the trigger, you miss the cue. And you kind of delay that. And then, of course, if you do that over a long period of time, you have people that have insomnia, or you have people that are not sleeping for the right amount of time because they haven't allowed their body to get that cue in the morning that enables them to produce the hormones. And it's not just that hormone, goes for a lot of the sex hormones, the endocrine hormones, how your body is managing cortisol, because all of these processes in the body need to be cued off by a light trigger. So seeing sunrise is the kind of trigger to your body. Okay, it's morning. We need to
Yeah.
start making all of these hormones. The bowel needs to start working. We need to get rid of toxins from the night before. We need to have a certain amount of cortisol in the body that allows us to actually want to face the day, want to go out and forage and do all the things that mammals are supposed to do. If you miss that cue, people are lacking motivation, unable to sleep in the evening, all of these things that we kind of put down to just, oh, I'm just a bit
Other
tired.
stuff.
Most
Yeah.
of it, yeah, it could just be that you're just missing that, very simple thing to do. And even, in England in the winter, you still are getting a lot of sun coming through the clouds, even though it might not seem like it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can
So,
get sunburnt through the clouds.
yeah, of course you can. Yeah, because the light's still coming through. So just to give that to your eyes in the morning, that can be red light therapy. You don't need gadgets. You don't need to do anything for that. It's just about regulating your own body in tune with the body's natural cycles. And they call this circadian biology or circadian medicine
Oh,
because
like your circadian rhythm
like
that you have.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're regulating your circadian rhythm, and the way you do that is to pay attention to light. And we talked about blue light. The other thing to do is when it gets to evening, like we're now kind of getting to evening here in England, and so pretty soon I'm going to start to put orange tinted glasses on so that I don't get so much blue light
Okay.
before I start to go to bed, because I want my body to realize that it's evening. If I'm looking at a blue light telly all night, or if I'm checking my phone, or if I've got, energy saving light bulbs that are putting out a lot of blue light, my body still thinks it's the middle of the day, even though it's evening. And what do mammals do in the middle of the day? They start to forage for food. So, of course, what do humans do when they're looking at telly all night? They're foraging in the fridge. You're looking for
Uh,
crisps and because,
snacks.
snacks. You're looking for snacks because you're telling your body it's the middle of the day, and that's what mammals do when it's the middle of the day. And so, I think a lot of people are just missing out on that simple understanding of light and how it relates to what your body's doing. you know get up in the morning, see the light before you look at a blue light of screen, because you don't want your body to think it's the middle of the day before your body's even started doing all the things it needs to do. And then in the evening, blocking out a lot of that bright light, blue light, winding down so that you limit technology, so that you give your body a chance to understand, okay, it's nighttime, I do the things that mammals do at nighttime, I get ready to sleep and regenerate, and again in the morning. Because really, that could be the most simple thing that all humans could do, that could really
Yeah.
eliminate a lot of these chronic health conditions, and certainly things like obesity, where people think that they've got a food addiction. Maybe these food addictions are coming not only from these highly processed foods, but they're also coming from eating at the wrong time of day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That is it's like such a simple solution, and you wouldn't even, like, I wouldn't have thought of it until you told me. But yeah, it's like really simple. Um, so if you wake up in the morning and you were to look straight at your phone, does your body like skip all that stuff that it would do if you looked at normal light instead?
Yeah, it does. It goes straight to daytime. If you get up in the morning and you look at your phone and it's a bright blue light, your body's like, "Oh, right, it's the middle of the day. Quickly, I must do middle of the day things." And so
Yeah.
your cortisol starts to rise, and the stress response starts to happen. You start to crave something. You crave food. People add to that, and then they start drinking coffee, and then you're super hyped, and you've skipped out, like you say, you've skipped out on that whole morning piece of starting to create all of those hormones, create hormones for the evening, everything that your body is really waiting for that cue to do. So I think, yeah, that, you know, and it's a huge thing, because how many people, check their phones first thing, because we're all
Yeah.
busy, we've all got stuff to do, we all need to know what we're doing for the day. You get up, you check your phone. But just that simple act, I mean, even if you live in a block of flats and you say, well, I can't go and, watch the sunrise, you could stick your head out the window, before you look
Yeah.
at your phone, and at least see the sky, which is something, I've got small nephews, and, they, summer holidays, they want to go on computers. And like, no, before you even think about that, stand outside and look at the sky, if you can, on the ground. Because also, your body's not just wanting to know what time of day it is. Your body wants to know where you are on the planet, and you get a lot of information from the ground. You actually soak up electrons through the bottoms of your feet, and that gives your body information. You know, it's important information that the body does actually use.
Yeah, grounding. What sort of information does it give you?
It gives
Like
you
what could...
it gives you information about the kind of like the planet and where you're at. So you're getting information about the magnetic fields, about the electromagnetic fields, like you say, seasonality. What your body should be doing at certain times during the year, because certainly in northern latitudes, the body is doing different things in different seasons. Um, and it just gives you like that it gives you an electron boost, because electrons are like the currency of the body. It's like a flow of charge in the body. You discharge all the positive charge that might have built up, and you absorb negative charge through your feet. So
Okay.
it's almost like a flower or a plant, it needs to know what season it is to do a certain process during the year. Well, it's the same with animals and people. We've just kind of lost the intuitive part of that, I think, because we've kind of stopped doing it. But getting touching your feet on the ground, is it snow? Is it cold? Is it warm grass? Is all information that your body is using, even though you're not consciously aware of it.
So does that have to be outside, or would it work, or like if you were inside on like a hardwood floor or something?
No, it only works really on ground. So you need to be on grass, on sand,
Just
you know,
natural ground.
natural ground. You can't sort of go out and stand on your deck. I mean, you can get the sunlight and do that, but in order to kind of really get the electrons coming up from the earth, you need to be on the earth. You need to actually put your feet. And that's why I think, it feels good.
It does.
I live on the beach. I'm lucky enough. I live down here on the south coast, and it feels good to be walking in the sand, especially wet sand. And I think that's because you're getting this electricity, you're getting these electrons come up through the ground, and it makes you feel good. It's something that the body wants to do. It's nourishing. And to
Yeah.
do that in the morning where you're getting the sun as well, that's a little life hack that's, don't need tech. You don't really need much time to do it. Just a couple of minutes of standing outside looking at the sky could really set your body up, for a much more healthy and effective functioning throughout the day than if you just missed that little practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask how long do you need to, be in the sun like in the morning or to just like look at the natural light? So only a few minutes.
A few minutes will be enough to kind of set that response. However, as long as you can is the answer. I mean, the best time to be outdoors is the morning because you're getting all that information. So, if you're someone who's lucky enough that you have flexible working, and you can be outside for like a few hours, that would be
Do
ideal.
it. Yeah.
But, most people are kind of fairly busy in the morning. So, like as long as you can fit into your routine, a few minutes, 10 minutes, even better, an hour,
Yeah.
do a bit of Tai Chi out there, if you're lucky enough to have an outside space. Um, but yeah, I think even a few minutes is gonna really help your body to kind of get those cues from the environment.
And what about moonlight? Does that have